Wintercon 217, and we're with Arlen Schumer, creator of, and we're just going to divert just a little bit, the Silver Age of comic books. Let's see the new hardcover. And if we could just get a peek, I just learned from Mr. Schumer not too long ago there's some extra goodies inside of this one that we don't get inside of the soft cover.
Yes. When you open up the dust jacket, underneath is an illustration I did wraparound of all the major artists in the book and their most iconic characters in their most iconic positions. For DC and Marvel to allow a joint character illustration and they let me sign it, this is worth the price of admission alone. $50, by the way. But yes, I'm very proud of my book.
Yeah, as well you should be. So while we have some time, just wanted to talk you up a little bit. Well, since we're here for Superman homepage, did want to talk you up on your opinions on, have you been keeping up with Superman? I'm certain you've kept up with Superman since the Silver Age, but have you been keeping up with his, let's say, trials and travails in the modern times?
In general, I keep up with modern Marvel and DC comics. Whenever I go to comic book store, I kind of get an overview. I'm on Facebook all day long, so I see enough posts about current comics. In general, I try to spend most of my time trying to be the kind of curator of the Silver Age, because so many greats have died recently, like Joe Kubert and Carmen Infantino, and they are the fathers of our popular culture. You know, all the superheroes they make movies and TV shows out of, and the average fan of the current comics doesn't know who these men are. So I spend most of my time and, you know, keeping up that, but I do, as an artist and as a comic historian, I try to keep up with what's going on. Specifically, what I don't like about Superman is it starts with the costume. You know, I hate the fact that they've made the costume trendy and not classic. You know, Walt Disney would never change what Mickey Mouse looks like. They would never kill Mickey Mouse. Great brands don't change their logos. They might modify them slightly, but the Ford logo, the IBM logo, the great products of American history, Time magazine, they've altered their logo, but it's the same basic logo. Only in comics do you get companies taking their flagship characters, like Superman, and rendering them unrecognizable, more or less. Don't even get me started on Batman. Batman makes Superman look like Kurt Swan. You know, my Batman swings on a rope and is an acrobat. He's not this lumpy Dark Knight with a utility belt like a construction worker's tool belt. But thank you, Frank Miller, because for the last 30 years we've had that version of Batman shoved down our throats. Now, ever since they fired Kurt Swan in 1986, who had been drawing Superman for 30 years, the baby boomer Superman, the greatest Superman artist of all time, I think Superman has gone downhill. John Byrne, I think, ran him into the ground. He turned Krypton from this beautiful planet of colored spires to this frozen wasteland, which they got from the Superman movie, which I didn't like either for that reason. I liked other things in it, but the idea of Krypton as this icy netherworld makes us feel nothing when it's destroyed. But if you destroy a beautiful, colorful Alex Raymond paradise, you're gonna feel something. But, you know, to me, Superman is like Captain America. Very tricky. How do you handle a character like that? I don't know. I only know the Jack Kirby Captain America. If you asked me about what they're doing with Captain America the last 30 years, I probably wouldn't know much about that either. But Superman is a hard character to write and also draw, because he's invulnerable and he's super heroic. But to me, that costume is iconic. You want to write better stories, write better stories. You want to draw better stories, draw better stories. But you don't change the costume. You know, you don't change Mickey Mouse. I'm sorry. But DC Comics does. And maybe that's why comics are selling as poorly as they've ever sold. Okay, the movies and TV shows, but people are not seeing the movies and going into comic stores and buying the comics. How ironic that comics are more popular than ever. We wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for the popularity of those movies and TV shows. And yet the comics themselves, including Superman, are selling at levels that 15 years ago Today's highest selling Marvel DC comic would have been cancellation numbers 20, 30 years ago. So I find that bittersweet and sad that the average person walking through here might know the movies and TV shows, but they don't know who Kurt Swan was. They don't know who Joe Kubert was, or they're watching The Flash and they don't know who Carmine Infantino was. I am in a Don Quixote tilting at windmills position of trying to stand against that tide. So instead of talking about Stan Lee, I'll talk about Jack Kirby. I'll keep up Infantino and Kubert and Gil Kane and these guys because they are our Renaissance masters. You know, we will look back on Kurt Swan 500 years from now the way art historians now look back 500 years ago on a figure painter like Raphael. We will look at Kurt Swan for the beauty and the serenity and the solemnness that he gave to Superman as an artist. By the way, it's right here in my book. That is Superman, pal. You want Superman? There's your Superman. Nothing DC Comics has done since 1986 comes even close to this version of Superman. Sorry, DC, but that's the way it is.
So, what from the Silver Age? If you could, let's say you could be publisher and CEO, creative officer of DC. Let's say we can make that happen. What from the Silver Age would you bring forward to now? Do you think it's missing to give that pop, that sense of wonder to comic books?
Those comics we read in the Silver Age were the equivalent, especially the Superman line by Weisinger, the editor. They were like children's books for us. I never read a children's book when I was a kid, but those DC comics, specifically those Weisinger Superman stories, were our equivalent of children's books. Simple stories, well told, beautifully illustrated, with morals and themes that would resonate in us, just like all the great movies and TV shows resonated with us kids. If I were publishing comics right now, specifically DC or Marvel, I would create an entire line of comics that looked like children's books. I know DC and Marvel have dabbled in it, but I'm talking about a whole line, a concerted effort to take their superheroes and take a leaf from Mort Weisinger's stories and try to write and draw stories in children's book form that would take these superheroes and teach those moral lessons that we learned from them in the first place. That's what's missing. You know, parents know where to buy children's books for their kids. That's one print publishing that is not dying. I think the children's book publishing is pretty healthy. So they know where to buy children's books for their kids, teach them how to read. My generation learned how to read from comics. But ever since they stopped making comics for kids and made them more for adults in the last 40 years, they've lost the kids coming up. Now they go right to video games. They go right to the computer. They bypass comics as a way to learn how to read. But yet, children's books are not dying. That means parents know where to buy them and are buying them. But they don't know where, the average parent doesn't know where to buy a comic book. And if they even see a comic book store, it looks like the flood hit it. You know, it looks like a boy's basement, most comic book stores. But they know where Barnes & Noble is to buy a children's book. So imagine if there was a deluxe case of DC children's books with Superman, Batman, and The Flash, and each one taught about religion and morality and morals and how to stand up and bullying and all the things you want to talk about. That's what I'd do. And I would hire great children's book illustrators and writers. I'd say, here, take Green Lantern and come up with a children's book story. I don't know what they would do, but I guarantee you it'll be great to read and fun to look at.
But some comic book readers, I've expressed that opinion to people that comic books should be more for kids. That allows everybody to come in and have that enjoyment. But they say, oh, we don't want that because, we don't want the cartoony art and so on and so forth. But you're not talking about making it cartoony. You're talking about the same type of quality that we
Why does it have to be an or, first of all? It can be an and. It shouldn't just be comics should be only for kids or only for adults. Movies and TV shows are separated. There's kids' movies and there's adult movies. Why? Comics should be the same way, but what's missing are really comics for kids. But it's not just the form, it's the venue. Comics have to get into bookstores with children's books that look like comics or comics that look like children's books. In my opinion, you asked me. That's what I would do if I were instantly made publisher.
We had the Silver Age, we had the Golden Age. I think the last great age of comics is probably the Copper Age. That's my opinion.
Well, what is the Copper Age? 1970? I thought that was the Bronze Age.
Copper Age is after 1986
Let me
to
tell you
1982.
something. I never heard the Copper Age. They usually go from bronze to platinum. Let me tell you something. The only metals that make sense are gold and silver, because to me, after the Silver Age, you get what I just call them by the decades. The 1970s, the 1980s. But assigning decades to metals makes absolutely zero sense other than gold and silver. And why? Because they're well known by the public. We all know what a silver anniversary is. We all know what a gold is. We know gold and silver. Nobody knows what Bronze Age means vis-a-vis comics. They don't know what Platinum Age comics are. They don't know what Copper Age comics are. I've never even heard of Copper Age. Call them by the decades, it's the only thing that makes sense. Even the Silver Age, you could just call the 60s. The Golden Age, runs up into the 1950. So what do you call the 50s? The Atomic Age, It gets ridiculous. It's really the decades. The 40s are distinct from the 50s as they are from the 60s. But if you're going to assign medals, only gold and silver makes sense.
Fair enough. So, that being said, what do you see as the future of comics?
Well, on the one hand, they're greater than ever. There's more variety. The independent comics, guys like Charles Burns, Daniel Clowes. But ironically, the mainstream comics are dying from sales. So while there's so many great comics being published and the hardcover archival editions, I grew up reading Peanuts and paperback books. Now, if you want to read the complete Peanuts, you can buy these beautiful Fantagraphics hardcovers of the whole run of the strip. These IDW artist editions of the facsimile original art reprints.
Yeah, those are beautiful.
When we were kids, we would have died if they had those when we were growing up. So we are in a golden age, pun intended, of incredible archival reprint editions for this young generation of know-nothings to buy and learn from. You can get the whole Winsor McCay, Little Nemo. You can get Crazy Cat. So we are in a golden age of reprints. The new comics, you'd have to talk to somebody that's really up on the Marvel and DC output of the last 30 years. To me, while all the art is competent and slick, it all has a bit of a sameness, a soullessness, a plasticness to it. Now, I can single out some great illustrators. J.H. Williams III, Mike Allred, Amy Reeder does Rocket Girl. There's a lot of great superhero artists still working. So I'm speaking in generalities. But the great comics, in terms of comics, words and pictures making you feel something, you got to go to the independent artists like the Charles Burns, Daniel Clowes, Jaime Hernandez, who does Love and Rockets. Been doing it since 1982 for 35 years. Still going strong. So there's still a lot of great comics out there, but like anything, you got to weed through the dross and get the good stuff. But man, there's a lot of great stuff out there to spend your money on. Absolutely. Buy my book.
Arlen Schumer, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you to you.